9 Pacific. I'm out in Los Angeles. I'm Brooks Melchior, your host. And today, my God, we have a packed schedule today. We have a packed guest lineup because there's a lot going on. There might be a lot of inactivity on your television screen or on your radio station if they cover sports, but not for us. Every day, there's something going on. And today, we've got talk about the National Football League with Charles Robinson. He is about as good a guy to go around the NFL and unpack all the storylines that are going on in the National Football League. Charles Robinson, who is a longtime Yahoo football reporter, you may remember him as an investigative guy in college football and college basketball. But Charles now is doing the NFL, and he's doing a great job at it. And we're going to be touching base with him here shortly to talk to him about specifically. I think we're going to drill down on Dak Prescott. That is the pressing thing right now going on in the NFL. For my money and Dak's money, I guess you could say, is Dak Prescott's contract is going to become an issue now that Zeke has his money. Who's next up? Is it Amari Cooper on the Cowboys? Is it Dak Prescott? We're going to find out on Sports by Brooks on FanCred here coming up with Charles Robinson, because he's been all but embedded with the Cowboys organization, and he's been discussing it on his own podcast and on his Twitter feed. So we'll do that here shortly. But we have a lot of other guests lined up. In addition to NFL talk with Charles Robinson, we're going to talk specifically about the Raiders, John Gruden, the Antonio Brown departure. Of course, the Raiders with a beautiful game last night, at least from their perspective, with the victory over the Denver Broncos at the Coliseum. And Ann Killian, who is one of my favorite writers in sports media. She is a sports columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. She's an absolute must follow, as are all of our guests. That's, a big reason why they're on, because they're at the vanguard of sports media. But Ann Killian, who is a great get, I think, for this show, we're going to have her on later on in the show to talk about Antonio Brown's departure, the Raiders, and she was embedded last night with the Raiders and John Gruden. So you can't find a better person to talk to when it comes to what happened last night in the NFL. So along with Robinson, Killian, we're going to talk NFL ratings, college football ratings. How is that going? Are people watching? Sounds like they are. Sounds like they're back in a big way, especially in the context of the last couple of years in the aftermath of Colin Kaepernick. So we're going to talk to one of my favorite guys on Twitter, Anthony Crupi of Ad Age. See, we're bringing you all these amazing guests from all these different walks of sports media and advertising media, business media. But Anthony Crupi specializes in sports. He writes for Ad Age. No better person to talk to when it comes to NFL, college football ratings, and the business in general. He's coming up later on this hour. Andrew Marchand. Andrew Marchand's my favorite guy for the New York Post. One of my favorite guys. I say my favorite about everybody. But Andrew Marchand's going to be with us, and he's going to be dishing some Schadenfreude, as he always does. Always. We're going to have to talk about Mike Francesa and the demise of his app. And I want to get Andrew on as much as possible from the New York Post to talk New York media, because there's nothing better than New York sports media to fulfill your quota for Schadenfreude. So Andrew Marchand, you can see the smile on my face. I can't wait to have him on. But he did a story that came out yesterday about Urban Meyer and how he's doing on the Big Noon college football show on Fox Sports. And he actually revealed in that article that Urban Meyer was the guy who told Fox to put on as their number one game on Saturday, the Michigan Army game, as Fox has an agreement with the Big Ten Network. So they do the Big Ten games every Saturday. And they decided to go with Michigan Army over Ohio State Cincinnati, which this was a call that was made months ago. And apparently, according to the reporting, and we'll get into this with Andrew, Urban Meyer made that call with Fox executives. And it's pretty astonishing, because if you look back, really, really astonishing. on that situation months ago, I mean, it would have been obvious to me that you would pick UC and Ohio State. Why would you go with Michigan Army? Well, Army took Oklahoma, as you may remember, to the limit last year in overtime, but Army lost a lot of players, 9 off that defense going into the game against Michigan. How could you have foreseen that Michigan would have had those kinds of problems? I mean, the service academies, they are what they are. They run the triple option, but I have a feeling, and I'm going to ask Andrew about this, that maybe Urban Meyer was soft pedaling his old friend Ryan Day and Luke Fickell, former Ohio State player who's the coach of Cincinnati. Maybe Urban Meyer wanted to take the spotlight off those guys, take some pressure off. That was a really pressure-packed game for the coaching profession inside the state of Ohio. Luke Fickell is a guy who has been aligning himself as such at the University of Cincinnati to possibly have a shot at that Ohio State job. But of course, after the 42-0 loss to Ryan Day and Ohio State on Saturday, that's not going to happen anytime soon, if ever. So maybe Urban Meyer was thinking about that when he recommended Michigan against Army to the Fox executives. So we'll get into that with Andrew Marchand. We're also going to talk about something that he was bringing up, and this was a big topic of conversation on Twitter if you were watching the Monday Night Football game last night, and that was the first down marker as far as part of the down and distance graphic during the Monday Night Football games. And in the first game, the Saints and Texans game, early on, whenever there would be a first down, you would get a yellow flash beneath the 1st and 10 on the graphic. And there were so many complaints on Twitter to the network that eventually that was changed mid-game during that initial ABC ESPN telecast. So Andrew Marchand was one of the many media members and fans who were part of that effort. And I wonder if he had contacted network executives and if that had had any impact. So we'll get into that specifically with Andrew Marchand, because if anybody has a direct line to ESPN executives, it's certainly him as far as reporters are concerned. So after that, we've got Arash Markazi, and this is a subject that I want to talk a little bit about today on my own as well, because I think that we may have played a role here at Sports by Brooks on FanCred in the, believe it or not, in the demise of Lynn Swann as athletic director after 3 years at USC. On September 3rd, I tweeted out about a little-known billionaire booster at USC named Wayne Hughes. September 3rd, right? That's a name that has never surfaced in the media, in public, as it relates to USC sports. And I said on September 3rd on my Twitter account that Wayne Hughes, the CEO and founder, a billionaire, from the Public Storage Corporation, which he started in Glendale, California, just north of Los Angeles, many moons ago. I said that it would be Wayne Hughes's call as to who would get that USC head coaching job after the season if Clay Helton is inevitably fired. And Wayne Hughes is the person that I mentioned. Again, all but anonymous. September 5th. Actually, it would have been, 2 days later, September 5th, an article comes out in the Los Angeles Times, and it is a deep dive, not that deep, but a deep dive into Wayne Hughes, his relationship with USC. Come to find out, he has given almost $500 million, but he's done it in a very veiled, discreet way to USC as a donor. Let me repeat that. Almost $500 million. Probably the biggest donor to any single university in American history. But this has all been done very carefully to keep it underneath the surface, keep his name out of everything. And so there's a long story about how Wayne Hughes in this Los Angeles Times investigative piece has a relationship with USC football players of the past. And of course, Lynn Swann is one of those players. Wayne Hughes, actually a close friend in the past of O.J. Simpson, and he helped fund O.J. Simpson's defense, of course, in the murder case against Nicole Brown Simpson. And Wayne Hughes is also pals with a guy named, and you might remember in relation to O.J. Simpson, Al Cowings, former USC football player. Well, Al Cowings' name is on a new dormitory on the campus of USC. I'm not kidding. Well, how the hell did it get up there? Wayne Hughes put it there because Wayne Hughes helped to fund the building of that beautiful new dormitory at USC. Of all people, Al Callings was the guy who was driving the white Bronco with OJ. They're both pals of this Wayne Hughes guy who gave $500 million to USC, right? I came out, finally, I'm the first person that I'm aware of who's ever really revealed Wayne Hughes as someone who is intimately involved with USC on any level. The LA Times, to its credit, does a quick investigative piece. No, Lynn Swann, who Wayne Hughes, I might add, hired as athletic director and was not qualified, gets fired. And this is after USC had engaged a search firm to interview upwards of 200 candidates for that USC athletic director position, including guys like Greg Byrne, former Arizona AD, former Mississippi State AD, now the Alabama AD. He was very interested in that USC job. Somehow Lynn Swann got it with absolutely no experience. A bit of a non sequitur until you learn and understand the influence that Wayne Hughes has at USC. And it just goes to show you what really runs that school. This is something we've always known, but this is a new name. And so Lynn Swann is fired yesterday. He was fired yesterday. My tweet was September 3rd about Wayne Hughes. The investigative piece from the Los Angeles Times comes out 2 days later, and now Lynn Swann is gone. I think another thing that might have prompted Lynn Swann's ouster in relation to that Los Angeles Times piece was a quote by former USC football player, now broadcaster, talk show host, color analyst, Petros Papadakis, who said in this article, he's quoted as saying, "Sometimes you wonder if Wayne Hughes has more power than the president of the school." Well, you have a new president at the University of Southern California in the aftermath of what are innumerable scandals, including that college admissions scandal involving Rick Singer. USC really is the epicenter of that situation. So with all of that in mind, they bring in a new university president. Now you find out about what's really going on at USC, who's really running the school with that $500 million. And he's hiring people like Lynn Swann, effectively hiring Lynn Swann. That's been the modus operandi at USC for many, many years. Of course, most schools, it's that way too. I'm not singling out USC, but and I'm not saying that I prompted this investigative piece by the Los Angeles Times, but I guess I am saying that because how the hell did that happen? Wayne Hughes' name, you can go and search the archives outside of the context of Public Storage, the company that he was the CEO and founder of, and he's got many, many, many other business interests. I find it really hard to believe that that's just a coincidence. But we're going to get into it with Arash Markazi because I have a feeling he's got some insight. In fact, I know he does. He's at the Los Angeles Times, but he is another embed this time in that USC program, as Arash has long been, even though he's a very young guy, he's been a fixture at USC. And we'll talk to him about USC. We're also going to talk some NFL with Arash. When you talked about, and we just got a comment from Jeff that we're going to go to about Wayne Hughes here in a second. But first, we've got Charles Robinson, NFL reporter for Yahoo Sports, on with us. How you doing, Charles?
What's up, brother? How you doing?
I'm doing great. And the first thing I wanted to mention to you, it's great to have you on, by the way. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's talk quickly about your own professional situation, because my God, what a job you have done as an investigative reporter all around. But talk about your transition from being an investigative reporter, mainly focused on college stuff, over to the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I spent some time covering the NFL before jumping into the investigative beat, and I think transitioning back was largely interesting because the investigative beat put you at loggerheads with a lot of NFL agents and certain people that you have to deal with on the NFL beat. Interestingly, some of the guys that you cover in the programs like Oregon, Miami, Ohio State, some of these coaches have transitioned into the NFL. So occasionally you'll run into, a coach a player, someone that was involved in some previous reporting, and that can get sticky at times. But I think the toughest part really probably was just after spending so many years off of the NFL, rebuilding your source book and rebuilding with teams, because I think I was out of it for 5, almost 6 years, and it changes so fast in the NFL. I couldn't believe how many guys who had previously been sources of mine were either fired or were moved off somewhere else in some other capacity, either in college football or elsewhere. So yeah, that was really the biggest kind of adjustment, and then also getting your feet under you in the world of Twitter on the NFL has been the news cycle went from hour to hour to second. So it's a new world, that's for sure.
I when you try to understand, because you don't always get credit in the situation that you're in for the influence that you have, especially the influence you've had in college football. When you look at college football today, and I bring this up all the time to try to provide some context into the situation, I think we're in a post-NCAA phase, truly.
Yeah.
And I mean, all you have to do is ask people, when was the last time a major college football star was ruled ineligible for anything?
Right.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Is there any kind of melancholy in you when you look at that, or do you think that's a good thing? I mean, it's kind of a hard question, I know.
I think the interesting thing about having done so many NCAA stories, and I'm curious to know if you kind of felt the same way, because you got up under the hood quite a bit as well. I think the longer you went inside it, the more you started to see the inequity. From the standpoint of athletes. You're looking at this rigid set of rules for the NCAA, and I think initially, particularly when we worked on the USC Reggie Bush stuff and, transitioned into a wide array of other programs, you kept running into situations with kids where I know when we hear about NCAA violations or whatever, it was always, the Trans A&M with Eric Dickerson, the gold Trans Am, or, but I started to see a lot of these situations where you would see a athlete's mother, for example, moved out of, wherever they had, where he had grown up, and now she's got an apartment in such and such neighborhood, and you'd go and see this apartment and you go, okay, like, this isn't the lap of luxury here. Like it was hard to continue to sort of see it from the villainous standpoint that the NCAA, that the NCAA was constantly approaching it from. And so I think over time,
well, I think it's us. I think that when you look at, it's like Alabama criminalizing NCAA violations, but it's not just that. When we place the athletes taking a ham sandwich or maybe what they deserve, fair competition,
right,
and we make it, and we use the word illegal,
right,
like it's some sort of crime.
Right.
They're not the ones committing a crime here in the grand scheme. They're having hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars as labor, playing a life-endangering sport, essentially stolen from them.
Right.
And I think for me personally, chasing that stuff down, I just remember Terrell Pryor at Ohio State. I'll never forget when they were investigating his situation with his mother, who could barely pay her rent, right?
Right.
And he was driving around this ridiculously beat up old Camry. And one of the Columbus TV stations was trailing him with a camera while he's driving this camera, and they've got the camera focused on his license plate. This is Terrell Pryor. And then you think about the Ohio State Athletic Department, where I worked with those people every day doing a show for 4 years in Columbus. And I know almost 100 people in that athletic department literally drive free cars that they get from the largesse of guys like what Terrell Pryor is creating as the Ohio State football player and team. And it can't help but have an impact on you psychologically after a while.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. Like the more you delve into sort of chasing after, the system that the NCAA had created, the more it was hard to block out the fact that these are commoditized individuals. That's how buildings get built. That's how stadiums get expanded. That's how Nick Saban's, able to earn $10 million a year. And I'm not saying that, look, Nick Saban doesn't have a special set of skills and he's not worth $10 million a year. Absolutely. I'm just saying, that pie, you got to let everybody in on it. And I think over time you started to realize, at least for myself personally, I started to realize, as you said, we would use that word illegal. And I'm like, there's no NCAA jail. Like there's no,
right.
I'm
going to steal that line. There's no NCAA jail. Right. I like that.
Right. And I think,
except in Alabama.
Yeah. You have these, you have these states that will, chase after, guys. And what's interesting is too, you realize a lot of those rules are put in place to continue to preserve, people say, well, amateurism. It's not amateurism. It is the bountiful nature that amateurism has become financially for all this, the wide array of individuals. Dan Wetzel, who Jeff Passan, who worked on the book Death to the BCS, fantastic book, talked about in depth about these bowl games and how they had just become, these cash cows for these individuals who literally that just became their life.
Bacchanalia.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty wild. So it's I wouldn't say that I am on the bandwagon to just completely rip apart the NCAA entirely. I think that it has to be approached from the standpoint of this system can be altered to allow athletes to take part in the financial other financial aspects of what they're creating. And it's not just a scholarship. It's not just training table, particularly from the aspect of their likeness. I've been banging the drum on, EA Sports, the EA Sports NCAA football game going away, and how that could have been,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And in the future can be a window to athletes earning some money off of their likeness. And so I think there is a balance there that provides both for college sports and us as fans and reporters and everybody else, but also the people, not just the coaches, not just the infrastructure around the athletes, but also the athletes as well, to earn, money that I think they rightfully do deserve.
We're talking to Charles Robinson, NFL reporter for Yahoo Sports, and I want to get into the NFL and unpack a couple of things from Week 1, but also something that you've really been covering. You've really been embedded into that Cowboys situation with the contracts and Zeke, Cooper, and of course, right now, front and center, it sounds like Dak. Lay that out. Where are we on that?
Yeah, I think Jerry Jones has a lot of optimism when it comes to these deals. I think he had a lot of optimism in the Ezekiel Elliott deal, and then it got frustrating as time went on. He's got a lot of optimism with the Dak Prescott deal. I think he used the word imminent, which I know in Jerry's mind he feels like it's imminent because Jerry says, I'm not going to let this guy get away. So to me, a long-term contract extension with Dak Prescott is imminent because I'm going to make it imminent. He's never leaving the Cowboys.
Well, the guy built that damn stadium, so I guess anything's possible.
Yeah,
right?
The whole city of Frisco, you go now and you're like, it's like this empire, this Jerry Jones empire between Dallas and Frisco. This, basically 1 hour radius around Dallas is pretty amazing. But in terms of the Dak Prescott deal, I think right now what's important for fans to understand is this is a years versus money situation. Everyone says, well, geez, the Jared Goff deal came in and that solves this entire situation. And the truth is, even though the Jared Goff deal did come in, the Goff deal was 4 years on top of 2 years. So it gave the Rams control of Jared Goff for 6 total years. Well, that's not the case with Dak. He's at the end of his current contract. So the control, whatever your extension is, the control would only be the length of that extension. So if it's a 4-year extension, you only control Dak for 4 years, which I think Dak Prescott would be totally fine with. But then I think, the Cowboys want 6-7 years of control of Dak Prescott. And Dak Prescott's camp is saying, look, if you want that kind of control, it's going to cost you more average per year. It's going to cost you more in guarantees. There's just going to be a heck of a lot bigger financial package than this 4-year Jared Goff contract extension. So that's kind of really the genesis of why this hasn't happened yet. What
about the interaction with the cap?
So the interaction with the cap it's tricky because of the unknown. And Jerry Jones has talked about this, where we have, once the CBA is done, we don't know what we got to look at what the revenues are going to do, and then how the cap is going to react to that. So you're kind of unsure about how to even plan the puzzle pieces beyond the next collective bargaining agreement, beyond 2020. So I think, because of the 30% rule, which is, I don't want to, everybody who's not an economics major or a math whiz, the 30% rule just makes it more difficult for teams to do deals right now, because you can only increase salaries 30% from whatever the salary is in 2020. So whatever the base salary is for a player in 2020, you can only do 30% jumps each year after that.
And where's Dak on that?
Right now, they want the contract front loaded anyway, like most anybody does, So I think the Cowboys, the way you get around the 30% rule is you just do a straight guaranteed contract, which is what a lot of quarterbacks want anyway now. So if you're going to do a 7-year contract for Dak Prescott, you should pretty much just plan on it being extremely expensive every year. So we're talking, $35 million every year. And the vast majority of that money being guaranteed into maybe even year 4 or 5, which has not happened with quarterbacks yet. But if you want 7-year control, tell Dak Prescott, we're going to pay you $35 million a year for 7 years, and we're going to guarantee 5 years of that. Well, that's $175 million, never been done. And, that's a really big part of this conversation right now.
So I'm looking at your podcast and looking at your timeline on Twitter and following your stories. And man, there's a lot of stories that stick out. And obviously, I'm going to make an executive decision. I was going to say, what's the story that you're really interested in right now? The number one story, but I'm going to make that executive decision, go with the Patriots. I'm going to go with Antonio Brown.
A good choice.
What, and there's been a lot of discussion. We're going to talk to Ann Killian of the San Francisco Chronicle, who wrote a great column about this. There's been a lot of discussion about possible tampering. Of course, Drew Rosenhaus has a long-time relationship with Bill Belichick. There was talk about the Patriots beforehand with Antonio Brown before he went to the Raiders. What's your take on that whole situation?
Hard to prove. It's really hard to prove. It's so difficult to prove tampering, particularly if it's not individuals who are just dumb. And Drew Rosenhaus, not dumb. Bill Belichick, not dumb. So, unless Antonio Brown or someone else, who is not used to engaging in this kind of subterfuge, were to say something, it's really hard to ultimately prove that. Now, that said, in defense of Drew Rosenhaus and the Patriots, I will say this: the Patriots wanted Antonio Brown back in March. They tried to trade for Antonio Brown back in March, and the Steelers. I talked to someone close to Belichick, and he just told me, look, they weren't having it. They weren't going to send him to the Patriots. It was not going to happen. And so what you have to understand, though, for those talks really to even begin between the Patriots and the Steelers, there had to have been some backdoor contract talks and frankly, even legal contract talks between Drew and the Patriots. Like, hey, what is this going to look like? You're interested, but can we get a deal done? So some of that financial framework was probably already laid out in March. It just wasn't as clipped, meaning the 1-year deal that he got plus the option year. But it does make it easier once you have the Raiders sitting there going, we're going to cut this guy. Rosenhaus is sitting there going, we already had contract talks with the Patriots. They clearly wanted him. They would have had him. They'd have him right now if it was their chance. Once he's released, it's as simple as picking up a phone and saying, are you still interested? Yes. And then here's the numbers we talked about before. Obviously, that's not going to happen now. Can we clip this down into a year? That gives him an opportunity to earn back some money if he does well, plays well. So there's certain things in place there. But look, I'm not stupid. None of us are stupid. There's no doubt in my mind that Antonio Brown knew at some point when he was on that Raiders roster, hey, man, I almost went to the Patriots. They really wanted me. Right. I'm getting a pretty strong feeling.
It's on tape on his podcast.
What's that?
There's a podcast where they talk about it, where Antonio Brown is taping Drew Rosenhaus off the phone, just like Gruden, and they're talking about the Patriots. So it certainly wasn't a secret. What do you think?
Before you ask this, has any player ever taped as many people as Antonio Brown at this stage?
I just think it's it's almost like he took John Gruden's manhood away, because Gruden's like, hey, it's great. Oh, good. It's awesome. You know, Chris Mortensen's reporting. You're getting these reports that Gruden thought it was great and he was in on it. I don't know. I mean, we'll talk about the Raiders in a second, but I wanted to ask you, though, two quick questions about the Patriots, the improvisational nature of the way Antonio Brown plays. Do you think that's going to fit in with the Patriot system?
I think he fits in. I mean, the one plus that you have about Antonio Brown is he runs probably the best routes in the NFL. When he's fully healthy, he's a guy that, you know, if he knows the system, he knows something's going to be open, you know, and he knows the right route that he has to run. He's, you know, it's on a dime for him. Now, you know, is Antonio Brown a guy who will make slight adjustments, you know, on his own, where he'll look and see something and then, you know, adjust to it? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of some of the nature of what went wrong between he and Roethlisberger, was Roethlisberger started to talk about things Antonio Brown should have done and didn't do. And then you get into this idea of, like, you know, is it the quarterback who should be noticing this slight adjustment? Is it the wide receiver? Whose fault is it? Why are we talking about this publicly? I think he'll be fine as long as, look, he knows what the offense is. He runs the plays he's got to run, and he's okay with the reality that Josh Gordon's on that roster, Julian Edelman's on that roster. These are guys that are going to get plenty of balls. They run a million running backs out of the backfield who catch passes. It's not going, as long as he knows it's not going to be Antonio Brown volume, like, hey, like the Steelers, we're just going to force feed you, you know, I think he'll be okay. And also remember, you're dealing with Tom Brady. And I think people undersell Tom Brady as a wide receiver whisperer. Like, he is. He's a guy that's
interesting. Yeah.
He'll buy into guys, and he'll get guys to, like, he and Randy were great, largely because Randy was accepting of it, and Tom Brady was like, hey, you're my guy. Like, let's do this together. And I think really that's what Antonio Brown, there's no ultimate form of flattery than to have Tom Brady look at you and go, we can do great things together.
That's
and
amazing.
I think Antonio Brown will be on board with that. It's just all the social media stuff and all that is what I worry about. Not necessarily between the lines. I worry.
Is he different? You think people are acting like he's an outlier? We've never seen anybody like him. Do you think he is different? This could be something they can't control. I think maybe. I think there's a 50-50. He can't control himself.
He's high up on that scale. Like, if you want to look at the scale, he is pretty far into the red in terms of a guy who seems to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and can't control the things that he says publicly. And when I had a chance to talk to someone with the Steelers after the fallout in Oakland, you know, he did say this is someone who has an absolutely immense need to feel affection from the outside, validation, and
that comes from his family. I think the background, or perhaps.
Yeah, I think some of it's familial. Yeah. I also think some of it is, this is a guy who went to, you know, Central Michigan, was I think a 5th or 6th round pick, entered the league kind of feeling like, hey, people were doubting me, and sort of that, the genesis of that in his mind being this constant struggle. Then I don't think people realize, but at least outside of Pittsburgh, you know, he spent that whole first season. The Steelers used to always call it, earning your helmet, which is funny. It's considering the whole helmet thing. You had he and Emmanuel Sanders, and basically Mike Tomlin told him, one of you guys is going to be active, and it's 2 dogs, 1 bone, earn your helmet. And you have to figure out between the two of you. It's like that scene in Batman where, you know, the Joker breaks the pool cue in half and throws it on the floor and says it's tryouts. I mean, that's, you know, between 2 guys, like it was like a tryout every week to get on the field. And I think that developed this thing in Antonio Brown's mind where he's just like, these people always doubt me. Nobody likes me. Like, I need to, and no matter how much money you make, there's certain guys that you can't buy that chip off your shoulder. And I think you can't buy that off of Antonio Brown's shoulder, and you can't ever satiate this need for acceptance and people saying, you're this great player.
We only have a little bit more time, of time with you. I don't want to keep you all day. I've got one more question, and that's about the Steelers, because in watching the Steelers, it looked like they were missing precisely Antonio Brown, because it's such an improvisational offense that they have. That's kind of the way Ben Roethlisberger and that offense does things. Maybe the team in general. I mean, are we going to start to see a decline of the Steelers here? And then you look at the rise of some of the other teams, perhaps in the division, we'll see. But what's your take on where the Steelers are?
I keep telling myself, every year, week one, and then you watch the games, and I watch the games. And I sit there, and I'm always like, oh my God, this team's melting down, or this team's
right.
So I try to dial it back and say, okay, it's week one. No one's as good or as bad as they look in week one, but the things that I saw with the Steelers that are concerning is, you have Juju Smith-Schuster, who now is he's your number one, but he's a guy who operates from the slot. He's a guy who is not operated on a entering a season scale as I'm the number one. Teams are specifically planning for me in terms of the passing game first. That was always AB. AB was always the guy who was going to draw the lion's share of defensive planning. Well, now that's Juju Smith-Schuster, and he's got to deal with that. So there's that aspect of it. And then what I didn't like was there are years with Roethlisberger where you would go to training camp and you'd get in there, and since I'm not there all the time, I would come in and I would, every year I'd make a note. Either Ben looks heavy this year, or he looks light this year, or he look, it was always this physical thing. How's he moving? How's he look? This looks to me and especially watching that first game, he looks a little on the heavy side. He looks a little older. He looks like he's not moving as well. Now, again, it's just one game. But I didn't go see the Steelers this year, but that's the note I would have made. He looks more in tune with what his age is for the size of quarterback that he is. I don't think he's moving quite as well, so I think that's another complication for the Steelers. The Steelers are taking that much offense out of there, not only with Antonio Brown, and I know they didn't have Le'Veon Bell last year, but still, you dial this back to 2 years ago when the offense was really clicking, and it is just not that unit anymore. It's not.
There's so many things I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, I'm good. You want to keep going? We can go. I got time.
We actually, I want to ask you one more thing about particularly about the defense of the Patriots. Is the defense because we talked to Tom Curran yesterday up in Boston, and we've talked to some people in that neck of the woods, and people up there seem to think this is a different defense for New England. This is something that we haven't seen in a long time. What's your thought on that?
Well, I would lean on Tom because Tom knows, Tom, let me put it to you this way. When I go to figure out what I need to know from the Patriots beat, I read a lot of Tom's stuff. And if he's seeing a different, iteration of what that defense is, that says a lot. I tend to always want to wait a month into the season, maybe even 6 games into the season to really know if we're fully seeing something that's drastically different. I will say this, the back end of the Patriots defense to me looks superb. The talent level on the back end of that defense in the secondary is, off the charts. Kyle Van Noy was a guy who wasn't on the field there for the Patriots in the first game, and that's another guy that's a key player there. I was stunned how well they played. When Tom said, this is something that looks different, does he mean from mentality, scheming?
Overall, the kind of dominance that they showed in the past. The personnel wasn't all there. Perhaps you had something that was missing, but for the first time, you really felt like this was an intact unit that could go a whole season and dominate. The Patriots, every team goes through this, but it's that much more ominous for the rest of the league. I'm just trying to assess from him when it comes to personnel and, mindset and execution, that this was almost a perfect beast that's out there on defense right now. Maybe the Steelers aren't that bad. I kind of lean towards the Steelers might not be what we thought they. It's ironic because so many people, you may have been aware of this, but so many people picked the Steelers to win straight up in that game. And
oh wow, really?
It was that's what I heard from the media, or at least taking the points, whatever it was, and it seemed like it was the opposite. So that's at least what I'm not only Tom, but I think people are talking about that this is a defense that we haven't seen in New England, at least in a long time.
I'll say this for New England. There's no better team in the NFL, none, and it's not even close, at not being static. Like they every year that and what's interesting to me is even inside of a season, they figure out a way to alter what their, if they find cracks or they find parts of their system that are failing in the off season, they can adjust to it, but they can do it in season too. I mean, I remember at the beginning of last season, I had a chance to talk to a couple of guys and, inside that organization, I'm like, what's going, cause they didn't look great. Like, I'm like, what's going on? And they said, we let too much speed out the door, in free agency, or, there were certain guys we didn't bring back, or we didn't go after some of the speed we needed. Wasn't a problem by the end of the season.
Right.
They figure out a way to either get healthy or they find the guys that bring the speed.
Well, they eventually find it by the end of the year.
Yeah. They're really good at adjusting to, and I think McVay said it best. And when I was in Rams camp, this is one of my greatest conversations of training camp this year. When I sat down with McVay and we talked about the Super Bowl, McVay said, I should have known, everything, like when you're studying the Patriots and you're sitting there and you're looking at 10 chapters and you go, well, I look at the personnel, look at what they've done this season, whatever. I know these 2 chapters I don't have to worry about because they're just not that. He said, so I study the 8 chapters, and then next thing you know, you're in the middle of the Super Bowl and you're going, all they are now are the 2 chapters. Like all they are. Right. I'm like, they're not going to be that. But then you get into the game and you're like, oh man, that's all they are right now. And I have a problem.
And I think, when you look at the performance the Rams had in the Super Bowl, somewhat mystifying. Perhaps now it's not so mystifying because of what we saw with the Steelers. I think now maybe you give the Rams a little bit more credit for that. Maybe it wasn't all of them, but the Steelers defense might be, the Patriots defense might be there already. It might not be that defense that develops and suddenly congeals in week 10 or week 12. Okay, now we're ready for the playoffs. But Charles, I can't thank you enough, man. We got to do this again.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, man.
That's Charles Robinson. He is an NFL reporter, and you know who he is. What are you talking about? The investigative reporter, always outnumbered, as he says on his Twitter account, Charles Robinson on Twitter. Check him out, and he's got a great podcast. It's the Yahoo NFL podcast. We're going to switch over now to Anthony Krupe of Ad Age and talk NFL ratings as we do a deep dive. My God, we're full immersion on the National Football League as we go through Sports by Brooks on FanCred. We're going to have Anthony Krupe coming up here shortly. Then we're going to be joined by Ann Killian of the San Francisco Chronicle, and we'll talk more AB, more Raiders, more John Gruden. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to focus primarily on the Patriots and the Steelers, and we really got into that the Patriots defense. I keep saying Steelers defense. Patriots defense. And if you're on with us watching here on FanCred and you see that fan line button, if you want to join into the conversation while I'm between guests, while we're talking about things in terms of, my takes, my monologue, I'd love to have you join us. We've got a lot of people I know that are out there. We've heard from Bauer. We've heard from Jeff so far today in the comments, and Johnson getting in touch with us here on the FanCred app. So if you want to come on and you want to talk to me about what we're talking about, you got a question, a comment, it could be about NFL football, whatever it is, go ahead and hit that fan line. But first, we're going to go over to the Ad Age journalist. Anthony Krupe is going to join us as we bring him up. Cam Smith, our producer in Boston. Anthony Krupe ready to join us here in a second to talk about the NFL ratings, what we're looking at in terms of the ratings, because my God, everybody can't get enough of that, right? I mean, you go back to the Colin Kaepernick time. And what's going on, Anthony? How are you?
Hey, Brooks, how you doing? I don't know what's happening here. There I am.
All good. No, man, you look great.
I need to get a backdrop like your last guest had on. This looks like a hostage video.
Are you in Pakistan?
It's terrible. I'm going to be beheaded when I'm done with this segment.
Yeah, someone's going to come up from behind.
Yeah.
We'll let you know. We'll tip you off.
Thanks for having me on. I'm glad you're back. And
yeah,
I'm happy to be talking about this because I know it's a tiny sample size, but the numbers that we're seeing right now look pretty promising. So, whenever you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, just from the numbers, we don't have the Monday Night Football numbers yet, I guess, until tomorrow. The final numbers, is that right?
We'll have them 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
But the overnights look good. The overnights are the highest they've been since 2015. So And I think, and this never happens ever, I think you could make a case that the ESPN games were the most fun to watch of opening week. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later when we look at the different windows and time slots. But that Saints game, the first game, was phenomenal. And I also like the fact that the ESPN producers seem to be following social media pretty closely, because once enough people started complaining about the marker looking like a penalty flag, they got rid of it. I mean, you saw that happen in real time, which you normally don't see. So ESPN, which is always, the argument with ESPN is, okay, they have to have Monday Night Football because they have to justify the huge price they get for the carriage. So $9 a head or whatever. They can't not have Monday Night Football, but they also pay double what Fox and CBS pay for the national window.
Thank you, John Skipper.
Yeah, I mean, and they get the worst matchups besides the NFL Network, which at this point I think they gave them 4 games and they're all on Saturday. It's just like, but so it's rare to see this kind of thing where both games were fun to watch. I think that was the first time I stayed up to watch the entirety of the second game, because not the clubhouse intrigue, I don't really care about that much, but watching, Williams step up and you realize, hey, maybe they don't really need this guy. I'm once in a generation talent.
Right.
So that was, I can't wait till the final numbers come out, because I think what's going to happen is right now, if you take all the windows, everything was up, including Thursday night. Everything was up 3%. But back out the national windows, which are the biggest, the money generating units, and it's up 8%. So everybody had a great week. Now, the numbers aren't what they were in 2015. They're never going to be.
So that was pre-Trump, obviously. I mean, pre-cap, pre-Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, do you attribute that? I mean, that no. Suddenly you don't think that was cap?
I don't. No, as a matter of fact, it's funny because we would get all this research suggesting, also, it would get twisted around by people's politics, but there was almost no way to show any kind of dotted line between what people were saying about I'm not going to watch and the actual numbers. I think mostly what we're seeing is the proliferation of streaming, which isn't always baked in. The out-of-home numbers are slowly creeping in, but only ESPN has been using them as currency. And I think the big sort of untold story is it's so easy to stream these games, pirate them. I did an experiment this week. I wanted to see how quickly I could find these things without
Reddit
doing the obvious thing, which is, go to Reddit. It takes like 3 seconds, and I'm old.
No, wait a minute. 3 seconds?
Like
I want to know how you did that. All right. We might have to talk after this.
I mean, if you know how to do
fast.
If you know how to do Boolean searches, it's pretty easy. So they're everywhere.
Right.
And I think the thing that surprises me most is the NFL isn't stomping it out. I thought for sure the one league that would really take a hard line with this stuff, and maybe it's not impacting ratings enough that people care one way or the other. Most of the feeds, you do get the full commercial load. So maybe then networks think, okay, we're not necessarily.
Well, is that a whack-a-mole situation though?
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I found a place that probably had, I would say 25 links, and, I don't know if they're all over the country or all over the world, but.
Was this like Sunday Ticket? I mean, all the games?
There are links to, I haven't seen any links to Sunday Ticket per se, but there are, one of the most popular links is to the Red Zone, the Hansen version. And Red Zone is, and I absolutely should not say this, because I cover advertising for a living, but by God, Red Zone is it's the best thing in the world because you don't have to sit through the ads. Although they're really getting you with the Amazon Prime this year. I just noticed that this year is that brought to you by Amazon Prime is very much an integral part of the broadcast now, but not nearly as intrusive as the regular 3-minute break. But we just did a story yesterday about how because I want to monitor the ad loads during the day, but for certain windows, say the early window, where I don't necessarily want to be beholden to that Cleveland game, especially the way things were going. And
Right.
I want to go back between that and Kansas City. And I'm not monitoring the ads. Red Zone's great. But so we switched to Fox for the second game to watch the Giants do what the Giants were going to do. And I noticed right away that Dennis Leary wasn't screaming at me about buying the truck.
You took the words out of my mouth. That was my next question.
So
I love this story.
I almost,
angle that you have.
Funny, I almost tweeted about it at the time, and then I thought, no, this is a story. Don't just like blab your ideas out there.
Blah.
And it turned out to be a story. They Ford is saying, well, we're still.
So explain to what you're talking about, though. What are we talking about here with Dennis Leary?
Oh,
what is the story? For
the last 10 years, he's been the spokesmuppet for Ford.
Spokesmuppet.
Okay, pal. Okay.
All right.
He's been the spokes guy for F-150 trucks, and as a New York guy who can't drive and really has no use for heavy artillery, and I will probably never in my life need to have that much lumber and drive it up a muddy hill. I'm always astounded by these commercials, but the tenor of them is so weird because he's just yelling at you. He's like, okay, pal, buy yourself a truck, you pansy.
But by the way, no one can picture Dennis Leary in one of those trucks.
No, I mean,
it would never be in one of those trucks. And he's a Boston guy, but and I'm not saying Boston people don't drive those trucks, but
and he's not even a Boston guy. He's a Worcester guy.
Oh yeah, well, there's a big difference there.
He's not even from Boston. He's from Worcester.
Right.
Plus, he lives in New York. So, yeah, no, that's the thing. I like watching as much as I like watching the commercial free feed, because after a while you get that 35th Geico commercial.
No, but it's the same. But you make it sound like they're different.
They're not.
It's the same spot.
It's the same spot. I mean, for a while.
Well, let me ask you. I'm going to cut you off. As an advertising guy, what is the story with them spending so much money to air so many of these commercials over and over? But why don't they spend more money in doing a variety of spots?
Well, they did for the longest time, and they had a different creative and a number of different ads within each. But
this
category.
is the business. I'm talking about the business, like Geico, State Farm.
Oh well, that's just they're
in general, because everybody seems to be doing it now. Just one spot, and they hammer you over the head with it.
It's weird because we've seen the data. It is the worst possible thing you can do in terms
I don't get that
engagement, because people really, we don't like commercials. We don't like advertising. If you're of a certain age, you grew up with it. You couldn't really avoid it. You could get up and go to the fridge or whatever, but it was the trade-off. It was the social contract. You're like, all right, I got to watch this ad. But back then, the ads were more engaging, and they didn't just keep hitting you with the same thing over and over and over again. I think the problem is Geico's an interesting case because at one point, they had about 7 or 8 different characters representing, which is insane because it's supposed to be Colonel Sanders. It's supposed to be, it's confusing, I think, to the consumer to hit them with the caveman and then give them an ABC series, which the money with the eyes on it. the get-go. It seems like counterintuitive. I'm sure their agency thinks.
Or the data. I mean, I have to believe they could quote us data. There has to be a reason that all of these companies, the State Farm, I mean, they're just running the same. Farmers Insurance, they're running the same. It might be a set of 2 or 3, but good Lord, I don't. It really gets to the point where I don't want to look at those products anymore, let alone buy them. Or participate.
The only one I do enjoy is because
Patronized.
it seems to offer a window into this nightmarish world that Aaron Rodgers lives in, apparently.
Right.
Why is that guy his agent? Why doesn't he fire him?
I love that.
And it's funny because in real life, his agent had to set that deal up. So they're just trashing this guy. And why does he put up with it? For years, it was the discount double check, and they would just scream at him every time. And he just seems, he has a perfect persona for it. He's deadpan. And he's kind of hangdog for, an NFL quarterback.
Right. He's an actor.
I saw him on 60 Minutes, and he got mad because they had a meet and greet with some local people. Somebody won a radio contest or something like that. And he's clearly not a guy who's necessarily he's not, he's not Peyton Manning. He's not Ben Roethlisberger, but he didn't necessarily have to buy into the whole local celebrity thing. And you could tell he's not entirely comfortable with it. So you have all this background on him. He goes to this thing. The first thing this Packers guy tells him, guy's wearing a jersey, looks great on him. And he says to him, he goes, you look a lot shorter in real life. And to his credit, he gets mad. He's like,
triggered.
Yeah. Okay, man. Great thing. Nice thing to say.
That's great. He's a real person, at least. Exactly. He is a real person. I mean, it's pretty strange with the family thing going on there.
Yeah.
It strikes me though in that state, and we're gonna have to run here in a second, Anthony. We got to have you back, by the way. We got to have you back on this show.
We'll get a better backdrop.
No, I love it. We actually want to start going through some of those books. What do you got back there? Or maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
But what I love about that spot that really doesn't ring true is he's got the Bluetooth on.
Yeah.
And he's in the skyscraper. That's where you lose me on that. That's where you want people to believe that. You lose me on that one. But we're definitely going to have you back, Anthony. This has been awesome. Sure. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Can I get one quick thing in on the one?
Yes, absolutely.
That jumped out at me. Last year, the local windows really drove much of the growth in the NFL. The late national windows, again, powerhouse. Fox for 10 years running. That's the highest rated, most watched show on television. And CBS got really close to them because they've got that mix now of the AFC and the NFC. Sunday Night Football was up 8%. ESPN was up. So everybody did well, but the real driver were the afternoon games. And the red flag that kind of came up with me just looking at the first week of data, and it's early and et cetera, but most, CBS sent their A team to Cleveland, and everybody was excited about that game because there's this irrational exuberance about the Cleveland Browns. The last time the Cleveland Browns went to the playoffs, Pat Mahomes was 6 years old. So people are saying, they're going to win the Super Bowl. It's like, yeah, we'll see. So that game was really disappointing if you're a Cleveland fan, and tremendously disappointing if you're a broadcaster and you bought into the hype, and now we've got 6 national windows for Cleveland. None of them can be flexed out. Now, some of the games, there's a Steelers game on Thursday night. I don't think Fox is going to take a hit either way because it's a good divisional rivalry. But the ratings for that window were way down.
Interesting.
If I could figure out how to find there it is. The ratings for that Sunday single header on Cleveland, and they had, it was primarily the Browns regionally, but there was also Kansas City, and that was a fun game, but it turned out in kind of a blowout in the end. So they were down 5%. Still, did a number.
Well, I think in the case of the Browns, you're rooting for. I mean, there's a distinct possibility we're going to have a dumpster fire. And this is a great setup for it.
Yeah,
with Odell and with Baker, and with the camp accent of the coach, right? Freddie Kitchens.
Yeah,
it really is something almost out of North Dallas 40.
Yeah,
I mean, you've got these characters, and I see they're running ad campaigns with Baker Mayfield now, and then we get the $350,000 watch from OBJ. So, hey, look, I mean, it could be a car crash, and it sounds like it's interesting though how they're throwing in, how they're trying to figure out in advance what's going to happen. Then you have the dynamic of the Steelers. And my God, what a nightmare against the Patriots. I want to ask you before you go one quick thing, and that is about Booger McFarland and that booth. What did you think of the Monday Night Football booth with Testor and the number one booth?
I didn't. I guess maybe this is the best compliment I can give. It wasn't overwhelming to me. I think the fact that it's just they're down to 2. That kind of cuts through the noise. I don't understand why you'd ever need 3 people in a booth to call any game.
Right.
Vince.
I mean, that's endemic to ESPN. ESPN has to be all about what's not going on the field.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the booth, whether it's the gadgetry. And then you look at some of the talk shows. We have to have this huge distracting Brooklyn Bridge thing going on with a tugboat going by. When you watch the Los Angeles set for something like NBA Jump, and we have it's actually fake. We've got to have this monster shot of the Santa Monica Pier. And it's almost as if, and when you look at the talk shows, I know this is a pet peeve of mine. When you look at the talk shows, because they're all the same, essentially, those debate shows, well, one is shot with a certain camera angle and a certain type of lens, high noon, one is done with this different thing. We have all these, we have all the memorabilia on this show. So, that I think that's one of the issues with ESPN. And I suppose when you don't have the goods, that's sort of your mentality. But unfortunately, I think it carries over to the football broadcast. They're quicker, I think, to go to commercial. I know they're paying a lot of money for the games, Anthony, but I think they're quicker to go to breaks. I think the production in general, it was supposed to change this year with Monday Night Football. I know they changed directors, but just in general, they're too distracted from the game. This is just I'm a geeky guy watching this.
I think part of the problem with ESPN is because they're a cable network, is they almost have to take more breaks because they're always giving up time to a local cable affiliate.
Right.
So that's gonna, they always say, oh, well, we have less national ad time, but they're paying $2 billion a year. They're going to figure out a way to do it. But with the South Street Seaport set, Skipper had a lot of big ideas for that. And it's actually kind of too bad none of them have come to fruition, because one of the things he wanted to do, and he told me when they unveiled, they did a walkthrough through the studio. It was like,
and we're talking about the Get Up set.
Yeah.
And which has, if people don't know, you have the backdrop of, what is it?
The East River. And the Brooklyn Bridge is right there, so you can see over to Brooklyn. And
it's iconic scene inside.
The idea was, let's have fun with it. Let's see, we've got access to the roof. Wouldn't it be great if Aaron Judge hit a baseball across the East River and it landed in Brooklyn? Which sounds cool. I love Aaron Judge. I don't know if they thought about the insurance. What happens when you're on the other side of, you're walking through Vinegar Hill and you're murdered by a ball and baseball's giant lad
murdered,
struck for TV. They wanted to get Rory McIlroy on the roof and hit a golf ball over the other side.
So they never have actually done that.
No,
huh?
That might have been the lawyers might have said,
right.
But that was the idea. But I don't know how much of the Skipper stuff, went with Skipper too. I think a lot of the big idea stuff got ramped down between Skipper and Jimmy, which is understandable. New boss, new ethos.
Well, when you look at that, and I want to get back briefly to the Monday night broadcast, what I was referencing to was when I say go to commercial too early and they're taking away from the football aspect of it, I can't count the number of times that it's seemingly that the ESPN, ABC broadcast will either go to a spot or they will not replay a critical play. This is ABC and ESPN, or they will not. Or they will, cover up something that's going on in the game. They're not focusing on the game. They're always doing features. They're always doing scenery. That's kind of my whole point. Mm-hmm. And so in the defense of somebody like Jason Witten, in particular, if you go back during the broadcast, they're so frenetic in how they direct the game and how they ignore part of the game that's going on. I mean, another example would be when there's a controversial call or a seeming controversial call on the field during the game, Anthony, there were times when they would just kind of, we'll go to commercial and we'll just kind of, well, they decided, nothing happened, let's go. I mean, that's my impression. I mean, maybe I'm totally off, but it seems like that's unique to ESPN in how they do their broadcasts.
Yeah, I think you see that particularly if you go from a CBS late game with Nance and Romo, and then, the next day you tune in Monday Night Football.
Right.
You keep those two things in your head, or even the Fox broadcast. I mean, the Fox.
They let those broadcasts, they let the CBS broadcast breathe.
Yeah.
And it did not breathe with Monday Night Football. Now, in fairness to that crew last year, and I think it's better this year, but Tessitore is a high intensity guy.
Yeah.
Right. He's not a laugh it up jocular guy. And I think Witten kind of needed a Nance. You can't underestimate the role Nance had in making Romo comfortable. Now you have this contraption with the poor Booger McFarland over there. And from jump, people are killing Witten. Just murder. Speaking of murder.
Yeah.
Murdering the guy.
Yeah.
And I would watch those broadcasts really closely. And to be honest, I think we all kind of take ourselves a little bit too seriously, but there are guys out there on the F team and the G team. And I know it's Monday Night Football. Witten wasn't necessarily worse than a lot of those people. People push back on me when I say that, but you add in all of those factors and then you go over and you look at Nance and Romo and to an extent, Buck and Aikman. It's a much more relaxed situation. So I really think people kind of Jason Witten was unfairly tarred. I'm probably the only person on earth who thinks that, but I don't know, that was just my thought. What was your thought on Witten?
Yeah. I mean, we don't give anybody time to mature into a role. Like right. I think, and now it's even worse because Tony Romo came in and was perfect from the jump. And like you said, a lot of that has to do with Nance, but he's just
perfect is relative.
Great.
Well, well, yeah, you're right.
I mean, I enjoy listening to him. His enthusiasm works for me because he also knows what he's talking about. It's funny. I talked to Rex Ryan at an ESPN thing a couple of years ago, and he was giving me a hard time because I said, don't you love how Romo knows what the play is going to be? And he's like, yeah, well, if he knew how to call plays, why was he such a bad quarterback? I mean, especially you're not a very good broadcaster,
right?
A tremendously entertaining human being, not so great behind the mic in a booth, fine in the studio. So it's just kind of weird. My favorite thing I saw on Twitter last week was during Sunday Night Baseball. So different sport, but same company. Somebody said, I will Venmo $100 to the booth if they just give me 30 seconds of silence. Just 30. Just 30.
I saw the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think I retweeted it, but you just took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I saw. And I don't remember who did that. Who wrote that? Do you remember who tweeted it?
Was it John Boy?
Yeah, it was John Boy.
Okay, yeah.
J-O-M-B. Now, who is John Boy?
I don't know. I just started following.
But he has like not. Yeah, but we same thing.
Because he was the guy that had the Savages in the Box video,
right?
Which MLB is really not happy about. But he's the guy who got when Boone rightfully, ran out and gave the ump a piece of his mind and said, my guys are Savages in the Box. Let me censor myself. He got that out on the internet, and it just blew up. And that's sort of his thing now. And he also breaks down video. He's really talented. I don't know who he is. Right. And he just sort of appeared. But that's what's great about the internet.
Well, he's got like 40,000 followers.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't understand.
I think he really blew up because of that, the Boone video. I also, somebody who wrote an op-ed here in New York, and I know like sports writers are always looking for an angle, and sometimes you're on deadline and you have nothing to write about, but it was like, oh, Brett Gardner, he's a mess. He's out of control. Every time I see one of the young kids get a hit in a clutch situation and go like this to do the bat, this guy he's the heart and soul of this team. I mean,
right.
Come on. But you can't get mad at every time you read a column, because it's just like some of the guys around here too, especially, don't seem to enjoy sports at all. So they watch the telecast and they're just like, I don't.
Bill Mushnick.
Okay, Mushy. Yeah.
Mushy.
I was going to say.
What an unfortunate name.
Yeah. I think it's not even the problem with the 3-man booth in baseball. They just start talking when it gets slow, and it doesn't feel like anybody wants to rein in, especially A-Rod, because he's the kind of bright, shiny pony.
It's like the Wendy Williams show or something.
Yeah,
with A-Rod. We got to run, Anthony. I can't thank you enough for coming on. We're definitely going to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care.
That's Anthony Krupe of Ad Age, and he's going to be somebody we're going to be leaning on when it comes to NFL ratings. You just heard that he had insight into all the windows, right? And we were talking broadcasters, and we're going to continue to do that with him. We'll get into some college stuff too. He covers a lot of different things. So we're going to have you covered on NFL ratings. We're going to have other, of course, sports media folks on the show. Sports by Brooks on FanCred. It's every weekday, Monday through Friday, and we're with you from noon to 2 Eastern time. Coming up, we're going to talk to Ann Killian, another one of my favorites on Twitter. She is outstanding in San Francisco with the San Francisco Chronicle. She's a columnist, extremely opinionated, and I would say one of the consciences, if you will, of we've got. Are we going to go to Ann Killian? So we've got Andrew and Ann. If we could, I would like to go to Ann if we could in this situation, Cam, and bring her up, and then we could talk to Andrew shortly thereafter, if that's possible. And then maybe we move Arash back if that works, or maybe we could try Arash. Perhaps I'd like to get them all in. I think we could still do that if it works with Andrew's schedule and Arash. But we've had Ann scheduled. We'd love to have her come up and talk to us. Ann, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How was your flight, by the way?
It was absolutely horrible. It was a disaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just trying to get back from the 49er game in Tampa took quite a while.
And then you're greeted by Raider Nation, right? Then you've got the black hole that greets you as you come back.
Yeah, well, luckily, despite all the trouble with my flight, I did have DirecTV, so I could watch the game. I didn't make it to the game. I ended up landing right in the middle of it. But yeah, it was interesting. It was a good game. That was as well as Derek Carr has played in a very, very long time. So I thought that was a big step forward.
Now, I'm thinking, is it a big step forward or is it the Broncos? I mean, what's your thought on how real this Raider team is? This is a team that has a shot, let's say, at 500. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think they have a shot at 500. I think I think there's a lot of questions about the Broncos for sure. But their defense is supposed to be good, and the fact that the Raiders were able to move the ball against that defense and that vaunted defensive line was not really much of a factor. And I know Vic Fangio from his time with the 49ers, and I have a lot of respect for him. And that's kind of a disaster of an opening game when you've been waiting that long to be a head coach,
Right.
especially defensively in the first half, which is mostly what I was able to see. The Raiders had them back on their heels the whole time. So I think that's a positive sign. I don't know what the Antonio Brown situation did for the team, except make them obviously circle the wagons and all of that. But it certainly fired up the crowd. And that, I think, was a big factor last night, because this is a lame duck team. This is a lame duck season. And if things, go wrong, that crowd is not going to be energized as it was last night. And so I thought that was kind of a big deal, that they were so fired up and so angry about the Brown situation that really seemed to bring energy into the building.
You were talking about John Gruden, and what is your impression of his handling of the Antonio Brown thing?
John, I don't think came out looking good in this situation. I understand why he wanted to trade for him, but I mean, if Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, a pretty buttoned up organization, can't make it work, you got to know that it's only going to get worse at the Raiders. I think John thinks he can connect with anybody, but if you look at the course of his career, that's not true. Be it a punter who gets under his skin last year, or Keyshawn back in the Tampa Bay days. I mean, it's just not true that he finds a way to work with all his players. So, but I think he believes that of himself. So they invited, the craziness in willingly, and then it got crazy, and he didn't like it. I thought he came off in Hard Knocks looking like he was really trying to do backflips to placate Brown. I thought, I was out there the day after the supposed incident between Brown and Mike Mayock, when he threatened to punch him in the face, and John stood there and said, deep down, Antonio's a great guy. So, and then this whole video thing is
Right.
so bizarre, especially with the news yesterday that supposedly John saw it and approved it. When he comes off looking like not very good.
Totally desperate, a total desperation. And do you think that that's a function of just trying to win games and avoid the disaster? I mean, is that what he's thinking there?
Yeah, they wanted.
I guess that's obvious, I suppose.
They wanted it to work. Antonio Brown is a spectacular talent. He's a generational kind of receiver. I love watching him play. Until the last year, and I'm on the other side of the country. I've got my own dysfunctional football teams to deal with, but I didn't really realize how bad he was in Pittsburgh, because they kept it pretty in-house. I think they kept it pretty buttoned up. And then it started to come out kind of just how crazy he not only was right then, but that he'd been. And so, there are very few teams that can absorb a personality like that. And the Raiders are certainly not one of them. The Raiders do not have a strong, tight organization where everyone is on the same page. They haven't. They had it a tiny bit in Gruden 1.0, but then Al was looming over all of that. So I've covered this team ever since they came back in '95, and they've never had that kind of an organization. So you could kind of see a disaster waiting in the wings.
There's been a lot of theories about what happened in terms of the release of Antonio Brown. What role do you think Mark Davis played in it? And tell us a little bit about Mark Davis.
I think right now Mark Davis is going to do whatever John wants.
Really?
Yeah. John is his $100 million.
So the release was John Gruden then. I'm sorry.
I would think so. I think it became untenable. Mark's not a guy to put down the law. I mean, for one, he's his father's son in the way. I mean, Al would always side with the player, always, right? The player is always right under the Al Davis book, and I think Mark subscribes to that. Plus, he was a guy when he was younger would just worship players, hang out with them, wanted to be.
Did he live with Cliff Branch?
He lived with Cliff Branch.
Yeah,
he was
that's
always
awesome.
hanging around with them. So I'm sure that he wasn't one to lay down the law. I think the laying down the law thing went to Mike Mayock by default. That's kind of was going to be his bad cop role. But, I think and I am a conspiracy theorist on this. I don't go back to March with my conspiracy, but I do go back to last Wednesday when things started when they find him, things started to fall apart really badly. It was never good. He'd never really been a member of the team. And I think Wednesday, Thursday, that's when the wheels really got set in motion. And I don't think a deal like that gets put together in 2 hours on a Saturday morning, his deal with the Patriots.
One word, template for Drew Rosenhaus. Well, we're talking to Ann Killian, San Francisco Chronicle columnist, and you wrote a big column about this. And, I know Drew Rosenhaus was in conversation with the Patriots. Maybe he left it on his computer or something? I mean, is this something that could come together that fast, or is this just kind of like the way they do it in the NBA, and we're going to do a wink and a nod from here on out?
I think it's got to be a wink and a nod. I can't believe it would. I mean, the Patriots were always interested in Brown, and clearly, everyone who observes the NFL said the one team that could take him in and make it work would be the Patriots. And if it doesn't work, he'll be gone because they do not tolerate this nonsense. So that always was in everyone's mind, that the team, and apparently it was always in Antonio Brown's mind too, but the Pittsburgh wasn't going to do that deal with a team that they, would like to meet in the AFC Championship game. I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen, but that obviously is the way the Steelers think. So, get him on the other side of the country with a team that nobody thinks is going to make the playoffs and hide him out there and be done with it. But I think, there was mutual flirtation along the line, along the way somewhere. So does it fall under official tampering? I don't know. But when ESPN reported that when after the 6:30 a.m. Pacific time, release me Raiders, thing went out on social media and other GMs started making queries, ESPN reported that it sounded like they were already pretty far down the road with the Patriots. Well, at that point, he hadn't even been released. So.
I don't know if I'm old school or I don't understand Oakland or the Bay Area. Why would I? I'm a Kansas City guy. I live in LA. So why the hell would I understand the Bay Area? But in watching the fact that the Raiders are playing out this last season in Oakland and to see the fans out there supporting them, and it absolutely looks like a normal situation. Isn't that a little strange? That they're leaving and that's happening?
Well, I mean, I think it is. I wouldn't want to put my money into them. I wouldn't want to take the abuse that team has handed out to its fans over the years.
Right.
Not only leaving them twice, but also not even being able to have a deal with Oakland until the last minute. Nobody even knew. And
right this year,
what you're paying for, the product has been so abysmal. And every year there's some carrot that, Raider fans believe. But I have a couple of good friends who are Raider fans and season ticket holders, and they go because they go with a huge group of friends, and the tailgate at the Oakland Coliseum is one of the best in the country. And it's just a fun scene, and that's why people go. And I think, last night there was something to that last Monday night in Oakland that resonates with the fan base because, for years, Al used to prop up their stat as being the best team on Monday night. Eventually that went away. But there's always been something about the Raiders and Monday night. So I can see why there was a big turnout. But, they're not going to be home now for, what is it? Well, they have Kansas City, and then it's like 7 weeks before they come back again. So
do you think fans have changed? Is it Oakland? I mean, put it this way. If that was happening in my hometown, Kansas City, and the Chiefs were going to leave,
you don't know.
All hell. I mean, the stadium would either be empty or there would be this undercurrent of resentment. And I know, God knows, it's a different situation.
Well, you don't know that they would be empty because you haven't been through it.
Right.
The Chiefs aren't going anywhere. I mean, there's a lot of anger.
So there is.
There is a lot of anger among the fan base. There's a lot of frustration, but there's also this deep, for those people who were in the stadium last night, there's a deep connection that goes beyond just, NFL games. It goes to their community and their friends and their routine. And I mean, my friends are, super successful, professional people who are ticket holders, but they go with a huge group of friends and that's their Sunday or in this case, Monday. And they're going to miss that. They're not going to go to Vegas. They might buy a ticket, make one weekend trip. But so I think there's, just as there was last year, like I covered the Christmas Eve game, which at the time we thought was the last.
Right. I remember it well. I was waiting for something to happen and it never really did.
But it was kind of felt like a big wake, like a really rowdy Irish wake out in the parking lot that day because it was raining and people were fired up and they were like, everyone was hugging each other and, there was a lot of booze flowing. And I mean, so I think there's going to be a little bit of that for every game this year. If they are good and competitive, then those fans will be very fired up. If they take a turn and they lose, they come back from this extended time away with a bad record, then I think you'll see some more frustration and empty seats.
Ugliness, maybe. Well, and I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
That's Ann Killion. You can get her at Ann Killion, ANKILLION on Twitter. And we're definitely going to try to get her back and keep us up to date on what's going on in the Bay Area. She's a great follow, and she's really at the cutting edge of what's going on in the Bay Area in terms of sports. We'll have to talk about the Niners with the next time. So first off, we're going to go back to now Andrew Marchand, who's with us as a guest from the New York Post, sports media columnist from the New York Post, one of my favorite follows. These are all, it's like the Twitter all-stars. And he is at Andrew Marchand at ANDREWMARCHAND. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing well. Good to see you, Brooks.
And so you had an interesting piece about Urban Meyer that just came out yesterday. And I don't know if it's the word shocked, kind of surprised at your revelation about the fact that Urban Meyer is kind of programming college football, what games we see on Fox.
I mean, I don't know if I go that far in terms of programming, but when Fox made the decision to go with Michigan and Army, they called Urban up, and they were deciding between that game and Ohio State Cincy. Ohio State nationally is a bigger draw than Michigan, just by a little bit. So you usually go with that, Ohio State game. But Urban said, you know what, you look at Army, a very strong team last year, and they got the triple threat option. And so he said you should go with that game, and they did, and it worked out for them. They had a big rating, almost 50% higher than last year.
Now, hold on, though. You also have a very high potential Schadenfreude quotient.
I heard you earlier. I heard you like an hour ago. Right. Your theory. I know, Brooks, you like those conspiracies. All right, listen, it's
not a conspiracy theory.
Listen, college football better than I do. You follow it closer than I do. And so you might be onto something. But go ahead. I think it's
no. I mean,
because the game was. Here's the thing. I heard your point like an hour ago, but I do think that it's not like that Ohio State Cincy game was on Periscope. I think it was on ABC or ESPN, so it wasn't totally hidden. But I hear you. Maybe you know what, Urban's doing his boys a favor.
Well, and it's not a coincidence that Luke Fickell left the Ohio State program. Urban was there, and now here's Urban's boy Ryan Day coaching the team. And Luke Fickell has a pretty damn good team. And he does every year. Ask UCLA. I don't know how excited Urban was about the prospect of UC going in there and putting pressure on Ryan Day. I didn't mention that earlier with a victory. Of course, it didn't work out that way. And a good sign for the Ohio State. Yeah, it was a big blowout. But so what have the reviews been so far on Urban Meyer and that Fox Big Noon show?
Well, I can only go by the two most important people on this call. So you and I would like them.
I love it.
I think it's been really good. I think when you look at it, everyone's going to compare it to Game Day. That's the obvious comparison. Game Day is a legendary show. It's been on for a couple decades. It's a happening at every campus. So how do you beat that? Well, two things. Number one, to get attention, you need big names. Fox got big names. The issue when you go and get big names is that a lot of times they're not interested in actually doing the work and drilling down on the sport that they're covering. They're getting paid for their name. The four guys they have, starting Rob Stone, obviously hosting, but then with Urban, Reggie Bush, Liner, and Brady Quinn, all of them seem all in. When they're talking about it, you feel like they are studying it, they're into it. And so that makes a big difference. But I think Urban's been very good. They had him describing how to run the RPO first week, defend it the second week. And I think the thing that Fox is very smart about is that they are putting him in position to coach on TV.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is tell us what you're thinking. And he's just off the field. He has all the knowledge. The only thing you have to do is allow him to communicate that knowledge. And if you do that, you're going to win. And I think 2 weeks in, they're winning. And a little interesting nugget, I had it in there kind of deep in there, but that first week, Brooks, they nearly didn't get on the air because the air conditioning went down at the Fox studios, and they really thought they might not get on the air, and they did last minute.
Now, why would that prevent them from going on the air?
I don't know the exact particulars. Yeah, but it blew out everything. I don't know, blew out everything. I don't know. They didn't pay a bill or something, but they were stressing about it. I don't know exactly, but it started with the AC, and it was a real concern, and that actually limited some of the things they could do that first week.
Now, what about Brady Quinn? I think Brady Quinn, honestly, it's funny because you look at some of the under 40 stuff that we have out there at the big league, and everybody seems to do that kind of thing. Brady Quinn wasn't anywhere on those lists. And, I know he does Fox Sports Radio on the weekends. He does some NFL games. And I knew he was a budding talent, but it was like you saw that setup that they had at Big Noon where you had Rob Stone way over on the end. I'm not saying Rob Stone's done, but I am maybe saying but Brady Quinn looked like he could be hosting the show and as an analyst, and he was kind of driving things. This guy is an extraordinary breakout talent. Am I overreacting?
No, when Fox Sports had their plan, their executives, when they looked at how they were setting up this show, they really felt like Brady Quinn was the guy who was going to anchor the show. If you look at the names of the guys, the four of them, Urban, Reggie Bush, Leinart, Quinn's fourth. But in terms of ability on the air and willingness to say
and
something.
And
the look is a good look. And I'm saying he's not a big name, but in college football, Brady Quinn is a huge name. He had an okay
it resonates.
NFL career. It resonates. And so, yeah, I do think that he has been very good. I think they've all been pretty good. I think Reggie Bush, had some room to improve, but still has been good. Leinert's been good. I think they all have been good. And there's a chemistry too. They're obviously trying to recreate what they have on Sundays with the NFL show. And, that show's decades in. The show's first, has done 2 shows. But you see that what they're trying to do. And what I do think it's important, and I talked to Urban about this, they're really trying to drill down on the football part of it. Game day
that's the
is
opening.
Good. Yeah, exactly. It's they're really drilling down on talking football. And I think game day is good, but it's really more about if you're a real college football fan and you want one more breakdown before your games, it gives you that. Don't get me wrong, it does give you that, but it's more about the signs and the atmosphere and Lee with the hats and you do get obviously some drill down, but they're trying to be a little bit more inside, get you into that, especially their first game. They're trying to make that a thing, Big Noon. And so far it's been successful. They've owned that window the first 2 weeks.
It's fascinating to see what happened in Monday Night Football last night with first down marker. Did you talk to ESPN executives? Who made the move on that to make the change and take the yellow graphic off the 1st and 10 graphic?
Yeah, I don't know exactly who made the exact call, but
maybe were you part of it? You think?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I think that they're
you moved markets.
Twitter. Well, thanks, but the Twitter. You know, they did a good job because they did a bad job and a good job. How that got on the air in the first place, and nobody, you know, they have 3 million people working on Monday Night Football, and nobody said, "Hey, look, why are we using yellow?" I mean, you know, the graphic people sometimes, you know, I talked to another producer from a different network, you know, last night when this was going on, and he said sometimes the graphics people who do these things aren't as big as sports fans. So they might have thought the yellow, the lime green, whatever color was that. Well, the graphic people, remember, they're like computer guys. But somebody has to say yellow. Can we use any color but yellow there? And I mean, it seems pretty obvious when you look at it before.
I mean, literally
any color but yellow. They put yellow on there. But give them credit, and this is where ESPN has, in my opinion, like over the years, I just heard saying about the 40 years. You know, at first you're small, you're very nimble, you make quick decisions. As you grow, this happens with every company. It's very difficult to not have this happen. Is that you become so big, everything's 10 meetings, and you got to go through so many doors to get something to happen. This was so I don't know how high it came up. But it came up from up high. There's no doubt a decision like that after they did all the preparation to change the graphics. That decision was coming up, you know, at the highest level of their either production coverage or even at Pitaro's level. It's coming up at a high level that we need to switch this. And there was a focus on that. And, you know, you could tell ESPN's coverage, they were really trying to just get back to the game. And so that was a little bit of a yellow flag, if you will, for their coverage. But the rest of it, they really went 180 degrees from what they were doing a year ago.
Talking to Andrew Marchand of the New York Post, sports and media columnist for the Post. What was your review of Joe Tessitore and Booger McFarland?
Yeah, so I'm kind of holding. I don't want to go too far into it. I want to give him a couple weeks, but look, it's better than last year. That's not a high bar, because last year
total disaster.
Well, because also they put people in positions where they couldn't, it was difficult. It made it more difficult for them to succeed.
And I still say Wooden wasn't that horrible.
No,
I'm the only person in the world who says that.
I've written that similar things in that,
and it goes to what you're saying. I mean, they did so many things in that broadcast, even beyond the Booger Mobile, where in the way that they direct that show, and I mentioned this to Anthony at length. We talked about it at length. In my opinion, they cut away. They don't run replays. They're not focused on the game. They got to do the features. They're doing everything but the game. And it's not just pro football. That's the way ESPN has done things. I think maybe with Pitaro in charge, that's going to start to change. But I saw a lot of the similar traits that we saw last night. But go ahead.
Well, I thought they had a more simple approach. I mean, look, here. So to answer your question, it's a win for ESPN because today everyone's not talking about the broadcasters. Now, they were talking about the yellow line. They quickly changed that narrative, which was smart. And it was just, you're doing right by your
Of course,
viewers.
You're the reason they're talking about the broadcast.
Well, I don't know. But the booth, look, I think when you look at it, the other issue with the booth is that Joe Tess has had 1 year in as an NFL announcer. You're asking him to do Monday Night Football. Monday Night Football is maybe it doesn't have the shine it once did, but it's still the only game on Mondays. It's still a big deal, and that's a hard ask even now with the year in of experience. Booger obviously knows his NFL.
That's his guy. That's Joe Tess's guy.
Yeah, Joe Tess's guy, but also he hasn't had as many reps in terms of doing games. That's also a hard ask to have that scrutiny. You know, if this was, again, kind of like when we talked about Witten, if this was the third, fourth, fifth team on one of the networks on a Sunday, you know, it's like, okay, that's a pretty good team. You're being graded against the top. You're being graded against, you know, the top at Fox, at CBS, and NBC, and even the second teams at the two networks that have the conference games. And I don't know if they're above those teams.
I appreciate it, Andrew. Thanks for coming on, man. We got to do this again. And I don't have any time right now to talk to you about it because I definitely want to get into Mike Francesa, New York media. You know, we're going to talk about it. It's ironic that I sat here and I'm banging on other guys' podcasts because they don't have you enough. They don't have you on enough to talk about the app. And now we have this closure on the app. And then we get into the radio wars. And we got Michael K's voice. And we got John Sterling going down.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. And then we don't talk about it. So we gotta do this again and talk about that stuff.
All right. Sounds good, Brooks.
Thanks, Andrew. That's Andrew Marchand of the New York Post. and we're going to get to Arash Markazi of the Los Angeles Times. And we're definitely going to keep track of that all-important narrative, the Mike Francesa app, which is no longer in effect now, the Mike's On app. But I want to go to Arash Markazi here shortly because I want to get back into the Wayne Hughes stuff. Now, I'm not going to float my theory that I was responsible for Lynn Swann's ouster, just so you know, when it comes to Arash, because who knows, you know. Somehow I doubt that I probably prompted the whole thing. Maybe they had that investigative report in the works. But one thing I do know is that Arash Markazi is, of all the people out there, is plugged in not only to USC athletics, but to the administration. And so we're going to get his take on what happened with Lynn Swann. From what I understand, he didn't resign. He was let go. And now we're going to find out what direction they're going to go. Is this going to be a new USC, or is this going to be an in-house hire? I think from the move to fire Lynn Swann, that's a huge tell that we're going to be going away from that country club environment that was fostered by guys like Pat Hayden and led to hires like Clay Helton. And I think there's a very good chance you may see USC really turning over a new leaf. So as soon as we get Arash on the line, we're going to talk to him about that. And in addition, we're going to talk about the Rams. We're going to talk about the Chargers if we have time with Arash as we're getting up against the clock. But we should have him here shortly. And there he is. How you doing, Arash?
Good. How are you?
You look great, man.
Thank you.
I know you're fast on your feet, improvisation, jumping on with us to talk about some major news. And I'm of the opinion, Arash, that you guys, that article, the investigative piece by the Los Angeles Times, much in the way I think it may have affected Pat Hayden's status at USC. You remember the report about the scholarship funds and that the Hayden family may have benefited there. I'd like to think that had to do with Pat Hayden's ouster. Are we kind of seeing another situation where the LA Times affected what happened to Lynn Swann, or am I off?
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think the timing of it leads one to believe that it wasn't something that listen, they just came off a really big win, and there's some high expectations maybe for this football season. So to pull the plug right now is like what happened. And when you look at that story that I think we ran on Friday, which recently, just talks about a donor that gave about $400 million, essentially putting Lynn Swann in the position that he was in when they had 200 Brooks, more qualified candidates. I mean, listen, raised some eyebrows. Is pretty.
So the donor had a personal relationship. The donor had a personal relationship with Lynn Swann.
Exactly. And he's had a personal relationship with O.J. Simpson and Al Cowlings. When there was a dormitory across the street in the brand new University Village that was named after Al Cowlings, there was a feeling like, what the heck is, but money, and I can say this, I mean, having gone there and worked at the school, if you have enough money, you can basically do whatever you want, unfortunately, I mean, as we've seen. And so, of course, you don't want to have a dorm named after Al Cowlings, but if someone is giving you $15 million, you kind of turn the other way and say, listen, let's just name it after this guy. Who cares?
And I think when you look at the college admissions scandal, if that's not foreshadowing to the internal culture at USC, but as a USC graduate and someone who's very close to the school and a very high profile media member, I mean, what do you think about this decision to let Lynn Swann go? Do you think that this is an indication that things are finally going to change and that this kind of incestuous arrangement that has propagated itself at USC for decades may finally be a thing of the past?
I think so. I think when you have a new president in place who's not tied to the old regime, I think the idea that you're going to go on and bring in another football player. I mean, Brooks, since 1993, they have hired 3 former football stars with no prior athletic director experience. So, I mean, you're basically walking in having never been an athletic director before, but because you're Mike Garrett or because you're Pat Hayden, because you're Lynn Swann, we're going to give you the job.
And then the Donna Heinel thing really makes sense.
Yeah.
The ability in that college admissions scandal, Donna Heinel, it sounds like, was kind of the ringmaster, at least at USC. And so if you happy, and I know Pat Hayden had a relationship with her, and there's a certain dynamic there that a lot of people don't know about in their personal relationship, but he kind of mentored her. So I'm not saying he didn't know what she was doing necessarily. Maybe he didn't know, but it's understandable though that you can get the college admissions scandal happening inside that athletic department when you're talking about people who aren't qualified. And it makes you wonder, over the years, now that we've said this, or you pointed that out, I mean, who has been running athletics at USC?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when I talked to Lynn Swan and he said he was blindsided by this, I mean, he probably thought that he was exonerating himself. But the problem is he basically gave so much power to this one person, and there was no checks and balances in place. That was the problem. You basically said, hey, Donna, listen, I really don't know what I'm doing here. I'm new here. You've been here. You handle it. So basically, this one woman who was on the take had the ability to bring in people and to get in students who were not scholarship players or
Worthy
or football players or like athletes.
Yeah.
And so he probably thought, listen, I was blindsided. I was surprised. Well, the problem is when you're in that position and you have that job, you cannot be blindsided by this.
Right.
And you cannot give one person that much power.
And she was put in place by another guy who had no experience, Pat Hayden.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I didn't mention that when I was explaining Donna Heinel. She has a very close relationship with Pat Hayden, and that's what enabled her to get into an extreme position of power where she's able to keep secrets. She's able to but who's to say Lynn Swan would have been paying attention anyway, even if he had the chance, or would maybe have covered it up had he even known about it. So I wanted you to assess now the football program and what's happening there, and what's your assessment of Slovis and how serious a turnaround? That's what we're all kind of guessing. What is this going to mean for USC going forward? Is this a 9-win team, 10-win team?
Yeah, I mean, there's this thought process maybe. I mean, if Slovis can be like that Sam Darnold type of guy where all of a sudden he comes in and kind of turns around the fortunes of the season, we'll see. I mean, listen, if they can win this Saturday in Provo, start the season 3-0, I think the expectations of this season does change. And maybe being able to win the Pac-12, South, playing in the Pac-12 championship game. Will it be enough, though, to keep Clay Helton's job? You got two pretty prominent names on who are available, as we've touched on before, in Urban Meyer and Bob Stoops. So
now, wait a minute. You keep bringing up Bob Stoops' name.
Yeah. Yes. He's in the XFL, bro. It's not like he's got this great job. He's in the extreme football league owned by Vince McMahon.
But I want to point out. I mean, are you the guy that is throwing this name out, or is this a name that's been bandied about? I need to go do a Google it.
Listen, there's no name.
Jack Del Rio.
So
he's hovering.
Exactly. No.
Jeff Fisher.
I think there was a.
You're trying to avoid those guys.
Well,
you don't want them in there. That's what that's what this is all about.
No, but I think when Bob Stoops left, there was this notion, and certainly from his point of view, that he was done with football. Well, now he's going on a media tour. He has a book coming out where he's essentially said, I think I was wrong. I don't think I'm done with coaching. So the fact that he's taking a job with the XFL, I can tell you, if he's interested in coaching, he will take the USC job over this Dallas, I don't know what they're calling themselves in the XFL. So,
well, anything is possible.
I'm bringing his name up. If he wants to come back to big time coaching.
Let's talk about UCLA, and it goes from bad to worse. Yeah. First ever loss to San Diego State at home in an empty stadium. And I keep talking about it, and the more I think about it, Wasserman's probably going to want him to finish the season. But what's going to happen at Chip Kelly? Because this is looking like a 1 or 2 win season.
Yeah, I saw you tweet that, and if that's the case, I can't imagine him coming back for years.
You mean if he has a 2 or 3 win season, he won't come back?
I mean, Brooks. I mean, if you finish this season with 1 or 2 wins, I mean, it's really going to be hard unless they have.
Who are they going to beat
over USC to finish the year?
Oregon State.
I don't know. I'm looking.
That's the one win. I think they got Oregon State at home.
I don't see a lot of wins. Yeah, so maybe that one. But I mean, I would have to look this up. I mean, that may be they've had some bad years, but if you're talking about a 1 or 2 win season, that's got to be one of, if not the worst seasons in UCLA football history. So if you're paying Chip Kelly that much, I mean, you at least expect to be playing in a bowl game,
right?
Las Vegas.
Well, and here's the thing too: you got an empty stadium, so now recruiting is going to be a real disaster because you got the visual, you got the optics of that. You look at what's happening with Willie Taggart. I just talked to some guys on a podcast for the Florida Gators, former players. They were talking about how that empty stadium at Florida State is absolutely killing Florida State recruiting. I think the biggest factor of all is going to be that empty stadium. They drew, 36,000 announced at the Rose Bowl. What about the Rams, by the way? Before we let you go here, because I know we got to run, what about the Rams? What did you think of week one? Gurley, Goff. I know it was a nice win, but what did it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, we still don't know where Todd Gurley's at. It looked like he looked okay for week one, but did not play as many snaps as I thought he would. Certainly, he was not the same player that he has been. And as we've touched on before, I think for the Rams to be a Super Bowl team and for them to have the season that they want to have, Todd Gurley has to be the player that he has been the last 2 years with Sean McVay. So they looked okay. They didn't look great. Big game Sunday, as you know, with the Saints at the Coliseum. And so if they can kind of get back to their old ways and have a big win, then I'll be a little bit more high, I think. On
Arash, I really appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
That's Arash Markazi of the Los Angeles Times, a columnist. Great show for you today. Sports by Brooks on Fan Credit. We're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to wrap it up here. Cam Smith, our producer. From Boston. But a tremendous show, great guest lineup. We'll continue to cover the NFL, college football, you can guarantee, and everything that's going on around the country. Set your watch to it, noon Eastern time. Sports by Brooks on Fan Cred. That's going to do it for today. Thanks for joining us.